We're now 5 races into the 2024 NASCAR Cup Series season, and there's been plenty of action. From the season opening race at Daytona to this past week's wildness in Thunder Valley, there have been a lot of interesting storylines that have developed. I sat down with Mike Forde, the Managing Director of Racing Communications for NASCAR, to talk about some of those stories, including the impressive television ratings to start the season, how the Netflix docuseries and other factors have contributed to that increase in viewership, and the latest hot topic of conversation, horsepower. And I'd like to welcome to the channel, Mike Forde. Hey, Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Kyle. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having me.
So first things first, let's talk about the TV ratings. I saw they just came out today, and I think it was 3.8 million tuned in, which was a 10% bump from last year's dirt race, which was held on Easter. But it continues a trend of the start of the 2024 season. So I know it was Atlanta, Las Vegas, Phoenix, and now Bristol have all seen really sizable increases in viewership over last year. The difference between this week and the previous 3 weekends is this weekend, it was the second most watched sporting event over the weekend, second to the NCAA basketball men's selection show. But the 3 previous weekends, the Cup Series race was the top viewed sporting event of the weekend. So I'm assuming NASCAR feels really good about this, but I'm curious what NASCAR attributes it to. Is it just the Netflix docuseries, or do you see some relation between Chase Elliott being absent these races last year due to an injury? So is it a combination of the two possibly?
I think it's 3 different things. Those 2 things I do believe play a part. So you talk about Netflix, and there were so many new viewers to that. Friends were talking to their friends, and I know I had family members and friends telling me that they were really super interested in NASCAR, even though I work for the company, but they watched the docuseries, so now they're starting to watch a little bit. Not diehards yet, but I think the start of the season may be turning them into it because that's my number 2. I think the racing has been very, very good. I mean, you look at Daytona, it's his own animal, but Vegas, but then you had Atlanta immediately after, and you had the 3-way finish, and then you had Las Vegas, which was a pretty typical NASCAR race, kind of your standard stuff, but it was an exciting one. You had Tyler Reddick chasing down Kyle Larson at the end of every stage and at the end of the race. So, but that was fairly what you get if you had to sort of predict what to expect from a NASCAR race. That's what you get.
Right.
Phoenix, some people thought it was terrible. I thought it was fine. I thought it was a typical Phoenix race, and kind of the same thing, kind of a typical NASCAR race, but maybe not as exciting as Las Vegas. And then you had, the Bristol race with its tire degradation, and that led to comers and going. So, we can get all into that a little bit more later on. But I think the racing has provided a little bit of everything for everybody. And I think that, with the momentum from the Netflix, which added some significant content in January to help springboard us into the Daytona 500, helps for sure. And then you look at the Chase Elliott effect, of course. I think that is certainly a factor. You look at last year, ratings were, I think, maybe up the last couple of races, but then when he broke his leg for the Vegas race, they went down, and he's a major star. So you look at other sports when their stars go down. If this is 10 years ago, but if Tiger Woods wasn't playing, the ratings for golf wasn't as high. NFL is a little bit of a different animal, but the ML, if you look at the single game of the week, Sunday Night Baseball, say, if Shohei Ohtani's not playing, you might not get people tuning in as much as if he was pitching that night or something like that. So I think that's a big part of it. I think we take the Netflix, the Chase effect, and I think really the good racing, to be honest, I think is really helping the cause. If you didn't have the good racing, I don't think you would have seen the first 4 races have over 4 million viewers. That's something we didn't have. We had 4 races over 4 million all of last year. So that's I think it's a little bit of both.
So talking about the docuseries, I guess the question I want to know, and I've heard other people talk about, Do we know if we're going to get a second edition of it? And if so, if not, if we don't know this, when will we find this out?
Good question. I don't know. I don't think we don't know. I think there is interest there. Not exactly in my wheelhouse. I'm more on the competition side, as far as that communication side. But everything I've heard from our leadership, from Steve Phelps, our president, Steve O'Donnell, our chief operating officer, is that's something that we would absolutely be open to doing a second season of, and I think we're working to make that happen.
All right, so let's move on to the actual kind of talking about the races. So just in 2 years of the next gen car, 2 years and 5 races, I guess, there's been 25 winners. So, I mean, I think that speaks volume to the parity in the sport. But then this year we have 5 different winners. But I think what's more impressive to me is in those 5 races, the combined margin of victory between all 5 of them is, I think it's 6.998 seconds, or just shy of 7 seconds. Whereas you look at F1, Max Verstappen, I think he won by 22 and 13, something like that. So how does NASCAR view the way the races are going, specifically in the next gen car? Because clearly it has changed the game. We have all these different winners and we have such close finishes. I mean, 7 seconds between 5 races. So what is NASCAR's view on all of the next gen car and how it's performing?
Yeah, that's a great stat. I didn't really think of that one. That's really interesting. But so we look at, when you talk about statistics, let's start there. So after each race, we look at a handful of statistics. One of them is margin of victory, but also importantly, margin between first and second throughout the entire race and first and third throughout the entire race. So we have data that's one of the measuring sticks that we use, because the last lap could be very close, but if the rest of the race isn't that good, that's right. Not, we don't like that. So sure. We look at throughout the entire race, including the final margin of victory, of course. We looked at something called quality passes. So quality passes are a loop data stat. It's a stat that we started taking in 2005. And we use it's passes not just at the start finish line, it is passes all across the racetrack wherever there's a loop embedded. So the quality passes are passes of cars under green in the top 15. We also take a look at green flag passes, which is passes across the entire field, and passes for the lead, which is a little bit different than lead changes. Lead changes are at the start finish line. Passes for the lead are all around the racetrack, again, at the loops. So those are the primary stats we look at. One other thing we look at is the driver who had the most laps led in a race, and how many laps that was. So if you look at, we actually liked the Phoenix number because Christopher Bell, I believe, led the most laps, but it was only around 60, it was under 100. It was, whenever you have a double digit as the driver who had led the most laps, that's a good indicator for us, where there was a little bit of variety, lead changes, not someone that's kind of got to lead checked out for the entire race. Anyway, so that's kind of the little background on kind of how we look at it. Now, when we take that and see how we're doing on the next gen car, we're very happy. You look at intermediates, miles better, in my opinion. I think our opinion, NASCAR's opinion, right. The pre-next gen. Super speedways, we feel that the super speedway racings are outstanding. Some of the drivers feel that they can't make as many moves as you used to in the Gen 6 car. The data says differently, and my eyeballs tell me differently. I look at what you saw at Talladega, in Atlanta, especially. They were going 3 wide, making all kinds of moves. Daytona's a little bit tighter, but they were still going 3 wide. It is different than the Gen 6, so I can see what they're saying, but all the data suggests that it's as good, if not better, with the next gen car. So we're happy there. Short tracks and road courses are where we're continuing to do some work. As you know, Kyle, we have yet another rule package for the short tracks. After year 1 of the next gen, it was clear that short tracks needed some work. In 2022, We held a test at Phoenix and took away a bunch of downforce from the cars, helped a little bit, still needed some work. Went back to Phoenix for another test. Didn't take away downforce, just kind of redistributed a little bit, and felt like it helped a little bit at Phoenix, but that's just one data point. We'll see it for a second time this weekend in Coda. It wasn't part of the Bristol package, but we will see it in Coda. And so hopefully, the road courses have been a mixed bag. Some have been good, some have been not so good. Adding stage breaks and cautions back at the stage breaks, I think is a good move. I know some fans don't love it, but I think after what we saw at Watkins Glen and Indy, it really needed to be back for a variety of reasons. So that is a very long way to say that the car has delivered, in our opinion, on the racetrack. A lot of different winners, tight competition, passing. It's really, I think it's cleared what was already a high bar for the Gen 6 when we left that car.
I guess the biggest question I have for the whole interview, Mike, is when are we going to stop calling it next gen? And when are we going to start calling it Gen 7? Because to me, it seems like we're 2 years in. Shouldn't we transition and start calling it Gen 7 at some point?
I wish we could just call it the race car. I don't know if it needs a name. I think you're right. It's funny you say that. I heard someone recently, maybe I was listening to Sirius XM NASCAR radio, and it was Larry Mack or somebody was calling it Gen 7. And he usually calls it next gen. And I wonder if he made a conscious decision to say, we're now next for 3 years. I don't know if we can call it that anymore. I agree with you. I think this race car, the current race car, Gen 7, I don't, as long as you're watching it, I don't care what you call it.
All right. So, you're just talking about Bristol. So let's just kind of dive into the horsepower debate, because to me, I look at it and you hear this common complaint amongst drivers, and it's always the short tracks and road courses, this inability to pass. But then when you look at what the Gen 7 or next gen car, the whole intent of it was to level the playing field. And to me, that means produce tighter competitive racing. And I heard Denny Hamlin say yesterday on his podcast, NASCAR wants to show more cars on the screen. So if that is in fact the case, and NASCAR does want to produce tight competitive racing, and that kind of goes against what the drivers are calling for, which is increased horsepower, which would increase separation. So, I mean, there's a conflict here. And I'm curious, we hear drivers say sometimes, like I think it was Phoenix a couple of weeks ago, oh, there's just no way, you can't pass. Like you said, the eyes show something different. You see something completely different. There is passing, there's comers and goers. So there's this ongoing conflict, I feel like, between NASCAR and the teams, or specifically the drivers. And we want to pass more, but NASCAR produced the Gen 7 or next gen car for the sole purpose of competitive racing. So how do we fix, or can we fix that balance, or is it supposed to be fixed, or it is what it is?
Well, are you saying using horsepower specifically, or?
Well, just anything where the drivers are talking about the inability to pass, whether it's horsepower or, as we saw this weekend, tire degradation. But I mean, they want more options to pass, and they need more separation. And my question is, NASCAR doesn't really want that, right? They want it to be close and tight racing.
Yeah, we want both. We want it all. I think tight racing is Denny's quote there is it's a good one. I think that's right. I think, when you saw, the 550 horsepower package that started in 2019, that many fans did not like, the goal there was to have higher downforce, less horsepower, not create a pack race every single race, but at least have the cars closer together, so that if one team hit the setup, they were checking out to a 10-second lead, that everyone would be pretty close together. And that is what happened. Did lead to passing, but it was also, there was a lot of that it created a bubble that they would always talk about that was hard to break. Moved off that, and now we have what we have with the 670 package, horsepower package. Great on intermediate tracks. I think you're always going to have aerodynamic aero issues. I mean, this has been, NASCAR has some of the best engineers in the world, but we can't change physics. It is what it is. I think there is a lot of, I'm not an engineer, but everyone talks about the mechanical grip, and I think the wider tires are a big part of this as well. So it is a little bit harder to pass because there's so much grip and everyone has so much grip. These are the best drivers in the world, but they're human and they can make mistakes. And that's where you get the good racing. And that's where they point to with the horsepower. Easier to make mistakes with more horsepower. If you have less grip, there's going to be easier to make mistakes. That's why we're working so hard on the road courses, because the brakes are as big as they are, bigger than they've ever been, which also leads to less mistakes. So I think we're working towards, that's why we took away downforce. That'll lead to more mistakes. This current package where we changed the diffuser, that will lead to more maneuverability of the driver, let them slide the car a little bit. That'll make it a little bit harder for some, make it a little bit more, put it in the driver's hands. So I think that helps lead to it. And I really think it's the tires. What we saw in Bristol is, I think, the proof there that you don't need more horsepower to create passing. I think if it was, Goodyear's working hard to make a tire that wears, and obviously didn't need to do it to that extent at Bristol, but if we can take that model, make the tires last a little bit longer, but have the same results, that's, I think, where it is. I mean, could horsepower be that answer as well? It could be, but it's not something that we have data that suggests that it will. If you look at when we dropped from 900 to 750, there are stats that say it was better than under the 900, but there's other stats that say 750 was better.
Sure.
So it's a roll of the dice. And if you move in that direction, there's so many dominoes on the other end that aren't really being talked about all that much. There will be a lot of cost injected into the industry if you move the horsepower higher. Plus, the new OEM conversation. It is a true thing. OEMs have come to us and said, "Hey, we want to be as plug and play as possible." John Probst has said in the past. He said on Series X7 a couple weeks ago, there's never been a better time to come into NASCAR if you're a new OEM. We have this car. You don't have to design a whole new race car, largely single source suppliers. So you can build a car, and then we have the engine at a horsepower level that's commensurate with other racing leagues. So you don't have to rebuild an entire new engine and do all the R&D that goes along with that. So that's kind of why we keep it. Cost and the new OEM are probably the 1 and 2. And number 3 is we just don't know if it's going to work. And to move in that direction and cost the industry that much money for a maybe is a little bit of a bridge too far. So we're concentrating on the aero side and the tires, working with Goodyear. And I think the proof is Bristol that if we can nail that, I think we'll see what we want to see.
All right, let's jump to Bristol. And watching the practice and qualifying and the confusion and the drivers and crew chiefs, everybody was so puzzled. I'm curious what NASCAR officials how they are reacting to it. Are like, this is exactly what we want. We want them to have to guess and figure it out. So was that kind of the reaction? What was the reaction from NASCAR?
For the race or practice?
Practice and qualifying. I'm going to get to the race in a second, but I was just curious because that was kind of a precursor of things to come.
Yeah. So the practice we got with the teams after practice and qualifying, and several teams came to us and said, "Hey, like, we were only able to go to 24 laps." One team came to us and said, "Hey, we might have a problem on our hands here." So then we went to Goodyear and showed some of the data that the teams gave to us, discussed some scenarios, some options of what we could do. But both NASCAR and Goodyear felt pretty confident that the track would rubber in, and we'd see what we saw, because the tire compound was the same in September. Temperature wasn't that different. The only difference was the resin, and we've used resin before. So no one was able to predict that this was going to happen during the race. We thought rubber laid down because that's what always happens, and it just never happened. Still working through why that happened. You look at the fall race. We had a triple header plus ARCA, so quadruple header. There was ARCA, trucks, and Xfinity before the Cup race. A lot more rubber had been laid down before that, plus qualifying and practice sessions for each of those series. So that might have had something to do with it as well. But so we left practice and qualifying, left Saturday saying, okay, we might have a problem, but we feel pretty good about rubber laying down. So we did respray again. The resin is supposed to help the track rubber up. We first used that at Nashville when it was dormant for that so many years. And the reason we put resin down there wasn't really to add another lane. It was to get rubber built up on the racetrack a little bit faster so that it would become more raceable. And so we expected that to happen. Obviously, it did not.
One of the things that I heard after the race, because of all the things that were going on, was John Probst talked about coming into the spring race, you guys dropped the allotment of tires by a set. So I was just curious what went into that decision. Why was it dropped? I guess it was from 11 to 10, or is that what it was? 11 to 10?
Yeah.
So what made that decision who made that decision to drop it, and why from 11 to 10 going from the fall to the spring race?
Yeah, it was just simply that all the teams had extra tires last year. So, they can't return tires once they're purchased from Goodyear. That's it. Their money's spent. So help teams save a little bit of money. We just dropped it down because we felt that was the number that they needed, because looking at what we saw in the fall, that was the number they used.
So I understand that Goodyear met with NASCAR. This morning, was there anything that came out of it, or how long do you think it'll be before we have any answers? I mean, Denny Hamlin's comment during qualifying or practice was, I think someone peed in the combination mixture. So, I mean, it was like everybody's confused as to what happened. So when do you think we'll know an answer to this?
It's probably going to be weeks. We still have some data to go over. I wasn't on that call with Goodyear, so I candidly, I'm not sure how that call went. I haven't debriefed with our competition folks on that just yet. But we're just kind of discussing on, where to go from here. Is it, John Probst said he wouldn't change much except give teams an extra couple sets. But there might be, Goodyear's also has a place in part with that. Teams, drivers, we need to discuss with them, broadcast partners. Whenever there's a major decision to be made, which I think this would fall into that category. A lot of voices have a say. So probably we don't have the Bristol race again until September, so we have some time. So I don't want to put I'm not sure what the timetable is. I wouldn't want to put it on a timetable for when we get some of those answers on why it was caught everyone by such surprise. But I think probably in the next month or two.
Okay.
Keep the guess on it.
And then after the race, Ryan Blaney, I thought it was really interesting when he's your champion and he's just flat out saying, that's BS. I call total BS. He said, absolute BS on Goodyear. Does anyone, I don't know how what the protocol would be, but it seems to me if your champion is calling out your tire manufacturer, that's not a really good look. You don't want that, because he's frustrated, obviously, because he didn't finish where he wanted. He started on the pole. But I found it struck me as an odd remark. And I'm just curious NASCAR's view on it, because it wasn't a different tire as he thought, and it just felt different. So does NASCAR, I wouldn't suspect you go talk to the driver, but does NASCAR have an opinion on that? Because clearly Goodyear doesn't know what happened. And when someone's calling out for BS, that's not exactly what I would think NASCAR wants.
Yeah, probably we'd rather it not happen. But I will say that, our leadership and leadership at NASCAR right now is as thick-skinned as it's been in its 75-year history, I'd say. You know, we take the arrows, and we're the league. That's going to happen. But we have been very adamant of drivers, speak your mind, show your personality, like do things like Netflix. You know, fans got to see you with the helmet off. That's how you get more fans. That's how we grow. So if we try to censor them every time they say something that we don't love, um, it would be bad. It would take us a step back. And candidly, we used to do that. I don't think that's the case anymore. You know, there's been plenty of examples where if an athlete says the same exact thing about their sport and that their sports leadership, there would be an envelope with a letter of a fine sitting on their chair in the locker room. We haven't found someone for something they said coming up on 10 years probably. And Ryan, he's an unbelievable champion. Since he's become champion, he has whatever media availability, you know, big ticket item, whatever we put in front of him, he says yes. It's frustration, heat of the moment thing. And I'm not a NASCAR driver, but they're probably like golfers. Every time I hear about a golfer, like they know where that ball is landing within an inch of where they're aiming. And if the ball feels a little different, they know it. If the club feels a little different, they know it. And the grass is bent a different way, they know it. So he's a champion. So he's probably like, there's no way this could be the same compound. I know I'm literally the best stock car driver in the world. It says so right here on my patch. So I get where he's coming from. I think he's wrong, but I understand where that emotion's coming from. So I'm sure, you know, there are some within the walls that work with Goodyear closely that didn't love that remark, but it's not like we're going to, you know, issue a fine.
All right, last thing, Mike. I'm just curious. It popped into my head the other day when I was after the race, and I'm just curious if NASCAR would consider something. And F1, we talked about how much better this as far as finishes and different drivers, but F1 uses all these different compounds on their tires. Would NASCAR ever consider that? Because to me, that seems like that solves the problem on the Cup race, because you give all these on Sunday's Cup race, but just in general, because you give them the option, and then they find out, hey, I used the wrong tire, and they lose ground. So is that something that NASCAR would consider?
So different compounds for one single race?
Yeah, just like F1, how they have a soft, a hard, and a medium compound, and you get to choose what you use coming out of the gate.
It's a good question. We've done that with an all-star race once, I believe, at least once, maybe twice, where we had a softer compound tire that you could use whenever you want if you needed to get through the field. But turned out, I think the entire field used them at the same time, so it wasn't as interesting as we had hoped it would have been. I would never say never. There's nothing that has not been talked about. I will say that we have not discussed that as a potential. But I would never say never, because we have done lots of unique things to try to improve the competition. So if that's something that we thought would help, I would say we would at least discuss it. Again, it would be a discussion with race teams, the drivers, and all that. Every key stakeholder would probably have to say in that one, but nothing imminent on something like that.
All right, Mike, I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with me. I hope we can do this more in the future for the rest of the 2024 season. Again, appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you in the future.
Absolutely, Kyle. Yeah, happy to do it. Enjoy my time here. Good luck.
Thanks.